Mark, you got a story for the people. It's kind of similar to your first one. What's going on?
Yeah, so I thought I would kind of do a bit of a compare and contrast as far as rights to assembly and rights to protest go, because this one also is kind of a First Amendment right, except that it takes place in Singapore, which, as you guys might know, has a little bit more draconian set of laws than we do regarding protesting and such. So this is climate change activists test strict Singapore protest laws. And it's really just an interesting piece on a couple of different protesters, one named Wang Jae-min, who is 18 years old. She is part of Fridays for the Future, which is a strike movement founded by Greta Thunberg. And basically, she just skipped school and decided to pose with posters protesting ExxonMobil in front of ExxonMobil's Singapore headquarters. Nothing happened to her, and then a week later, the police show up, confiscate her electronics, and kind of sternly suggest that she doesn't do that anymore. The other thing that's interesting about this is that Singapore itself is a low-lying region. They're kind of close to the waterline, and global warming will probably affect them pretty soon compared to any other place on the planet. On the other side of that coin, about 1/3 of their entire production for industry comes from basically chemical and petrochemicals. So they're kind of, it's just this weird case of, well, they understand the existential threat, but at the same time, they have to reconcile that with the fact that they're being run by at least 1/3 of their economy by petrochemicals. And again, this is kind of the opposite end of that coin, where they allow, there's one park that you can protest at. You have to first get a permit to do so. Otherwise, even if you're just one person holding a sign, technically speaking, you can be fined up to $3,500.
Wow.
Yeah, like they very, very much limit the amount of protests that go on. I think they talk in this article about a man who decided to walk a mirror out of that park to the Capitol and got, I think, put in jail for a while just because that was his protest, and apparently that was enough to kind of set the police off. So I guess one of the things that I was kind of doing with this is just trying to figure out, this is the dystopian future of that crackdown on churches or not, and somebody try to parse the difference.
Well,
Okay,
I'm going to say real quick that sounds very much like the U.S. The fine may not be as high. Like the U.S., it's like 500, maybe 200, depends on the area. But you still need a permit to protest in the U.S. So, and the police will still come after you if you do that, or enough people do that. Maybe the floor is larger. Like if one person does it, I don't think the police, they might hit you for loitering at that point. They probably wouldn't get you for anything else. But there's unlawful gathering laws in the U.S. So to me, it doesn't really sound all that different from experiences that me and Kid have done early in Hard Lens Media when we've been covering protests who didn't get a permit, and the ones that did are just moving from one corral to another.
Right. So here's how I'm looking at this. One, look, I do agree with protesting was against climate change, and definitely, ensuring that, hey, we have a planet, because, climate change is going to impact us all. On the other hand, too, look, there's no cure, no vaccination, no one's immune to COVID-19, okay? So this thing's not going around, and public gathering right now at this point is a bad idea. And we might see something more draconian like that in this country, even though it's already here, but to a much larger extent, with the aftermath of what could happen for this Easter. Well, we'll see what happens when, more people get infected, especially in some of these more impoverished southern states, or all these other states where they're having these large gatherings. Because as soon as this happens, there will be a larger crackdown, because no one's safe and no one's protected at this point until there's a cure. I don't like saying this. I don't even like toying with the idea of harsher lockdowns. But until people realize that no one's really immune to this.
But again, you have to take into concept, okay, so let's say that you are somebody in Singapore's government who's being fed 1/3 of their economy by the people that are being protested. Let's say that you decide that is in fact an existential threat that will somehow drive your country into abject poverty, and is, some schmuck keeps saying, the cure is actually worse than the disease. Who makes the decision of that existential threat? Who makes the decision of, this is an okay way to lock people down, this is not an okay way to lock people down?
So even on that just reminds me of when Wall Street got protested after the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing. Wall Street is an enormous amount of our GDP because they're really good at pushing numbers around to make a lot of money. But I get it. It's like Singapore sounds more American by the more you read the story. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and also another thing too, and that is until we were able to at least figure out how to really handle this kind of situation, because again, we've never dealt with something like this in a society that's so connected like ours, where everything's been global, thanks to globalization, thanks to all of us now it being so interconnected. For a lot of people, this is it's odd not to have large public gatherings, and especially during the summer, it's very weird for people not to be on the beach or to be in the city or to be or going on vacation or flying around. Everything is shut down, and until I think we all realize that this is a situation that's understandably out of our control, it's not going to sink in. And look, we gotta find out some way to flatten the curve. I don't want to see anyone else get hurt by this, but at the same time too, I don't want to lose our social freedoms. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And looking at this virus and just how devastating it is, it's not going away anytime soon. And we were talking about this before the show even started. Look, at worst case scenario, COVID-19 is still with us for 2 more years. I mean, that's a worst case scenario kind of thing.
Here's I think this will be a good final point for this, to Mark's point on democracy. On Easter, and I'm not suggesting anyone doing this is purely a thought experiment. On Easter, a bunch of Christians are going to end up in a bunch of churches throughout the country, and I would love to see groups of 100 people. Again, this is purely a thought experiment. Don't do it. A bunch of Americans go and protest in public parks, same numbers, match the church populations, and see which group gets arrested in larger numbers.
Yeah, exactly. We'll actually see. That'll be an interesting experiment, but I think I already know the answer to it. The protesters are going to be arrested before the people attending church are. So there we go.